like anything. She's definitely
Yeah.
She doesn't know that she's at home. It's just they don't have to go home. Sometimes knows us the
Oh.
and it's more and more difficult for her for us to care for her.
Yeah, exactly.
So she just needs to be in a place where professionals
Knows
how to care
me.
for her.
Right. Yeah, I think
That's what we're looking at.
I'm really glad to see. I tried, and I would get medicines out of the little thing I'd put them in, and I just.
Exactly.
Not too repetitive.
I'm pleased like I'm yeah, she is.
Lovely place, and a clean place, and
Right.
good smell, and everything.
Right.
Lots of people there.
Last week,
are very
2 weeks ago when we were here, I didn't videotape the morning session. I was going to videotape the evening session, maybe take turns, see who laughed more at my jokes, and I'd videotape them. And the problem was is that then I got to the evening session, I set up the camera, and I never started it. And so I finished talking on that Thursday night. I thought, well, now I need to go stop the camera. And I was like, oh my goodness, I never recorded it. And I'm really recording it so that people are gone. They could watch it online, and for my mom, of course. And so I came back in on Friday morning to record it to like empty rows of chairs. It was super awkward. Like people were like walking through their offices, like, what is she doing? And so I thought that maybe to make it less awkward, I would play one of my little songs beforehand, kind of get me, in the spirit. And I would come up here just as that song was fading out. Well, I didn't really pay attention to what song it was. I just played the last one on the CD so that it would stop itself. Well, the last one CD was a live song. So that meant it was a lot longer than I thought. You know how they go on and on, like they repeat another time. And then at the end of it, like I'm walking through trying to be like cool, like okay, lots of people are out there, no problem, imagining them. And then the CD ends, and because it's live, they go, yeah! And it's like really awkward that I'm like talking to an empty room with fake applause. So if you want to enjoy that 3 minutes of my own awkwardness, you can watch the second session video on our website. And I mean, like, it's super awkward. I'm standing here and like, I think I'm trying to look like prayerful, but I'm really just like, oh my God, when this song ever ends. So it's kind of like a prayer, I guess. But I asked Jill maybe she could edit that part out, but it had already been posted. So alas, there you go. That's reason number 54. I don't want to run a video camera, but I did push record this morning, so let's see how that goes. I like to imagine that my family is a camping family. One of those families that's like, just on a whim, we'll toss the tents, or maybe not even the tents, we'll just grab the sleeping bags, toss them in the back of the Jeep, and the problem is, it's got to be a Jeep to go camping, and a Jeep doesn't hold 6 people, so my vision kind of breaks down right from the very beginning. But let's just run with this. We're the camping family. We toss our stuff in the car, and we head out into the wilderness. We find like the perfect clearing beside a lovely stream, and I'm like camping mom, so I got the jeans on and my hiking boots. I'm real cute, and my plaid shirt that fits. That's probably my husband's old one, but I look so cute in it. My hair just tossed up in a ponytail, and I think you're not like camping mom if it's all about appearances for you, but there I am. And I'm setting up the camp, the tent, no problem, starting a fire, and I can hear my husband and children down by the stream laughing as the fish jump into their hands. And they bring them to me, and I fry them up my cast iron skillet. And then my husband gets out the marshmallows, and we gather around the fire, and we roast our marshmallows, and we tell ghost stories, sing a few songs with the guitar. The children drift off to sleep under the glittering night sky. And well, our camping doesn't really look like that when we do it. It's more like we get there late to the camp spot, and we have to like stuff our money in the little like state park slot to pay for our spot, and it's the last spot on the corner that's real small and close to other people, and it's already getting to be dark, and we're trying to find like the last piece of the tent. We can't remember how it goes, and the kids are whining, and so we just slap together like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches instead of roasting anything because we don't have time for that, and then we do get a fire going, and by we I mean Joshua gets a fire going, and the kids they're going to make some s'mores, but it turns out nobody really likes marshmallows. And the only ones who get eaten and not in Serena's hair are the ones the baby finds, like in the ashy leaves down there. He likes them evidently. And so it's like 73 wet wipes to clean them up, just enough to walk down to the bathroom, right? Because, well, we're not really a camping family, so we're going to use the bathroom. And it's one of those ones where you have like bird-sized moths swarming around the orange, glowing light bulb, right? And the toilets, are the toilets always like white on the bottom and black on the top? What is that? Right? And you sit on them and they kind of rock. And you know you're going to be back there at 3 a.m. So you check around for like snakes and spider webs you're probably going to run into. Probably clear it out because you're going to be back there in the middle of the night. Then you're walking back and 3 children are fighting over the one flashlight that you found in the trunk of the car. Who's going to carry it? And it's probably going to break before you get back to the campsite. And then you notice that your camping neighbors, like, they're not really getting ready for bed. They're pulling out like a big cooler. They're talking kind of loud. And this is the beginning of my sleeping portion of our camping trip, right? All 6 of us in the family-sized tent. And somebody's knees are always in somebody's back or somebody's feet or in somebody's mouth. And one kid has to have the window zipped up because the bears might get in. Well, the window's not going to do it, honey. And the other kid needs the window unzipped because it was so hot I cannot even take a breath in here. And we cannot be happy about this. And I know that I'm going to wake up every 6.5 minutes because somehow in the semi-darkness we put our tent on top of a pile of medium-sized gravel. I think I would like camping if it wasn't so uncomfortable. I'm always sleeping on the rocks. Well, I still have this vision that we would be a camping family. We haven't done it very often for obvious reasons, but I thought we would practice and then it would be easier the next time. So I had this idea that we would put our tent in the backyard and we would all sleep in it together. And we had nice grass, so this would not be the gravel problem. And I was like 8 months pregnant when we did this. That was maybe the last time I slept in my tent. I might try it again, but we might not end up being a camping family. I don't know. We'll see. The jury is still. Maybe when they're older, right? That's why I tell myself. It'll be easier when they're older. Moms of older kids, don't tell me it won't. But today, we are all going to be camping once. We're going to camp today with Jacob, right where he is. And our daily study took us all the way into the beginning of chapter 29. But we're going to back up, just like I promised, and pick up the last half of chapter 28. And we're going to stay in chapter 28 of Genesis. So if you want to turn there, that's where we're camping today. So we're not going anywhere. Of course, we know from our study, this is great. It's like talking to the honors class. You guys know what's going on. I don't have to introduce Jacob to you. I don't have to tell you what's happening in his life. You know that at this point in the story, Jacob has managed to wrangle both his birthright and his blessing from his brother Esau. So Esau is tipped, like mad enough to kill him. And that means that Jacob is on this journey from Beersheba to Haran, ostensibly to find a wife from among his mother's people. But we can tell that this is, Jacob is fleeing for his life, right? He might end up finding a wife as well, but he's on the run. He's homeless, for all intents and purposes, with little more than a blessing on his back. Read in Genesis 28, verses 10 and 11. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. Jacob is having to put as much distance as possible between Esau and himself. And so he goes as far as he can that first day until it's too dark to go any further, and he kind of just drops down where he is and grabs the nearest rock for a pillow. Don't you hate when you forget like that one thing you really need? Right? For me, it's always the baby's pacifier or my contact case. But for Jacob, it was his pillow. So he just grabs a rock, and he lays down on this stone to sleep. And verse 11 says, when he reached a certain place. But it seems to me that this place for Jacob is far from certain. He knows where he's been, but he knows what he's done there. And he knows where he's headed, but he doesn't know who he's going to find. And so this place for Jacob is much more uncertain than certain. You see, Jacob is on the way somewhere. And this place where we're going to camp with him for the rest of the session is a nowhere kind of place. Insignificant. They don't even give it a name. Just stopped in a certain place. Purposely vague. Much later we find out it had a name, but it's not really worth mentioning here. This is just a dot on the map, side of the road kind of spot on the way to Haran. Jacob, in Genesis 28, is both literally and figuratively in an in-between place. He's not where he's been, and he's not yet where he's going. He's just somewhere in between. And so as we approach this passage today, I want you to consider, what are you in between? Because I want to argue that we live our lives in an in-between place. Between where we have been and where we are going. Between who we have been and who we are becoming. Our lives inevitably bring change that puts us in a place of transition. We can think back over a variety of transitions we've experienced in our lives. There are physical transitions. We change locations from living in one place to living in another place. We move out of our parents' house. We move back into our parents' house. We sell one house. We buy another. Maybe we move across the country or just across town. Any physical move puts you in a position of disruption, right? It doesn't matter if it's just down the block. We changed bedrooms at my house. It took me 2 weeks to stop going in the wrong room and run into furniture. Any relocation, any transition disrupts us. And the physical move, when we make them, we are so aware of how everything is disrupted and up in the air that highlights for us, or at least could highlight for us, the way that all kinds of other transitions in our lives, we make ourselves aware of them, are disruptive. We find ourselves in an in-between place. Because it's not always a physical transition, right? Perhaps much more often, it's a transition in roles. We change roles of life. We don't necessarily set aside a role or a relationship for good, but a particular role will take precedent in our lives in a particular season. And so we move from the role of dependent daughter into independent woman. We move from single to married, from married to single. We move from wife to mother. We move from mother of small children to mother of teenagers. Lord bless you. We move from a full house to an empty nest. We transition from newly married to 20 years in and not a lot to say at dinner time. And family roles aren't only the only relational roles that change for us, right? We have friendships. Perhaps yesterday's best friend is today's occasional phone call. And this person who is close fades out of our life for a season. Working relationships change. Work changes. You get a job, you lose a job, you start a career, you change careers. You have a different job but in the same place. In all kinds of ways in our lives, we find ourselves in these in-between places. Somewhere between our Beersheba and our Haran. And sometimes it's less tangible. It's an emotional in-between place. Maybe we were in a place of joy, of comfort. We find ourselves in a place of loneliness, of grief, of loss. Maybe we're in a place of peace and rejoicing. And we find ourselves transitioning to a place of conflict, of challenge. Or transitioning again to a place of happiness. These transitions happen all throughout our lives. And so wherever you are today, I would argue that you are in some way, an in-between place. Some of those in-between places are places we choose. Transitions we want, and some we don't. Some of those in-between places are good and exciting and hopeful, and some of them are dark and difficult and painful. But if we stop and think for just a moment, we can discover what our current, today, in-between place is. Where's your Beersheba? And where's your Haran? And where are you on the journey from one to the other? Because we're in between people, this section of Jacob's story speaks to us. I want us to notice first Jacob's pillow. You remember, of course, verse 11 says, taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. That's the very beginning of this passage. We skip to the end, to verse 18, we hear, early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. So, what had been a pillow becomes a pillar. Which is, I don't know about you, that seemed like a little bit more than just a natural transition from pillow to pillar. It's going to take a transformation. What if? What if our in-between places that we experience as points of transition, what if, by God's active power and presence, they became places of transformation? You see, in between Jacob's pillow and pillar, prompting, enabling, undergirding that transformation is our God. In verse 11, Jacob reaches that certain place that we've identified as an ordinary, exilic, and in-between place. That's verse 11. Verse 12, he had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord. Verse 13 says in the NRSV, and the Lord stood beside her. In that certain place, in that difficult, uncertain, in-between place, the Lord stood beside him. Right there. In Jacob's dream that's more real than life. Right there in his in-between place where Jacob's sleeping on a rock. God sets up a ladder and steps down from heaven. Right into the middle of the ordinary, exilic, in-between place. We can't miss verse 13 because it's crucial to understanding our own experience that God steps into our in-between places, into the mess and the muddle, the conflict, the hurt, the weariness, the loss, the fear, the uncertainty that's all mixed up with hope and accomplishment. At that in-between point, in every in-between place, God stands there beside us. And he speaks his promise. The Lord said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. God speaks what is to us a familiar promise, right? This is sort of your standard patriarchal promise. It's the promise he spoke first to Abraham and spoke again and again to Abraham. It's the same promise he spoke to Isaac. It is almost word for word the same promise he spoke to Abraham, now spoken to Abraham's grandson, Jacob. It's no less expansive and gracious, this promise that God will give them countless descendants, that he will give them a land, that their family will spread to inhabit that land, that others will be blessed through them. That's your standard patriarchal promise passed from generation to generation to generation. It is no less gracious for its familiarity, but it is absolutely the promise that we have heard before, that Jacob has heard before. Until verse 15. In verse 15, God's standard promise expands. For Jacob, who likely wouldn't settle for anything less, God gives a more. He says, this is the promise, plus this. For Jacob, who is in between. For Jacob, who's on the run. For Jacob, who is uncertain and hurting and searching, God expands his promise. For each of us. For all of us who find ourselves in an in-between place, God expands his promise. Listen to verse 15. I am with you, and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Do me a favor, close your eyes just for a minute. Picture yourself, however you can, in your in-between place today. On the way from where you've been to where you're headed. And in that place, imagine the God who stands beside you. And hear him say, I am with you. I will watch over you wherever you go. I will bring you back. I will not leave you. And open your eyes, but hold on to that promise. There are three parts to it. The first is that the promise is a promise of presence. God says, I am with you. You see, the ladder of Jacob's dream symbolizes this passage between heaven and earth that blurs the border between where God is and where we are. So what we discover is that where we are is where God is. And God affirms that reality. He says, I'm not up there, I'm not far off, I'm not distant and looking down. God says, I am with you, alongside you. I am present. This promise is first and foremost a promise of presence. It is second, a promise of protection. God says, I will watch over you wherever you go. Most literally in the Hebrew, this reminds me, when I was watching the video, unfortunately, which is a very humbling experience, I should probably do it every week. I'm watching the video, and I actually hear myself say, I don't know if I said it to you, because this was, of course, to my empty room, but I probably said it to you. I hear myself say the words, sometimes I like to read the passage in the original Hebrew. Well, there are a couple of problems with that phrase. Because when somebody says, sometimes I like to read the passage in the original Hebrew, that is unbearably and embarrassingly pretentious. Nobody likes to read the original Hebrew. You don't read Hebrew, you decipher Hebrew. The second problem with it is that it's a lie. I don't read the passage in the original Hebrew. I can't read the passage in the original Hebrew because I forgot that skill right after I took the final exam for my Hebrew class. What I do is, and the only way I ever read Hebrew is by means of an interlinear Bible. I like to toss out big words when I'm admitting my fallibility. An interlinear Bible means that there are lines interspersed. And so on the top line you'll have, and you could download one of these off the internet, you could read your original Hebrew. The top line will have the Hebrew characters. Those are really pretty to look at. And then right underneath it, very wittily translated. So the English doesn't necessarily make sense, but it's an exact translation of the Hebrew are the English words. So I read that English line while looking at the Hebrew line, and that's what I call reading Hebrew. But it does give you a sense of sort of woodenly what the Hebrew language says. And so here in this passage, what it says literally in Hebrew is, I will keep you in which way you go. I will keep you. I like it a little better than just, I will watch over you. I will keep you. One commentator calls it the shepherd's promise. It's a promise of protection. God says, I'll hold you close. I'll protect you. I'll guard you. I will keep you wherever you go. The third part of this promise is the promise of return. You were expecting a P, weren't you? Right? Presence, protection, and return. Sorry, best I could do. God says, I will bring you back to this land. On this very first night of his exile, when Jacob is on the flee from the only home he has ever known, when he must be feeling that loss, maybe even the regret of what he's done, more than any other time, God says to him, I'll bring you back here. You know, they say you can't go home. God says, I'm going to bring you home. And in Jacob's case, and maybe in our case, the reason that seems so impossible is because we know that bridges have been burned. As far as we can tell, there's not going to be any return to what was, unless God has a plan to redeem what is broken. God promises that he's going to rebuild what we might have torn down. God promises what is lost, he'll restore. God promises, I will bring you back. This expanded promise from God, promise of presence, of protection, and return. This I am with you promise that we hear in this in-between place between Beersheba and Haran. It's the first time we hear God's I am with you promise. Because God is faithful, he repeats that promise over and over and over again in the pages of Scripture. So God says to his prophet Jeremiah, whose life is at risk for God's sake, God says to him, they will fight against you, but they will not prevail, for I am with you. And God says to his whole community of people who are desperate in their exile from the promised land. In Isaiah 43, God says to them, do not fear, for I am with you. When you walk through the waters, I will be with you. And this promise becomes the very name given to Jesus Christ. The Gospel of Matthew says they will call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. God says to his people, God says to us, if you wonder where I am, look to Jesus. For in Jesus, God is with us. On the other side of this Easter week, the risen Christ says to his followers, even as he's leaving the earth, he says to them, I will be with you till the end of the age. This is God's I am with you promise. And it echoes from Genesis 28 all the way through the pages of Scripture, all the way through our own story. God says, I will not leave you until I've done everything I have promised. Ladies, he's promised a lot. That promise is transformative. Pick up in verse 16. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. How often do we wake up to realize that? He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. Bethel means the house of God. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's house, then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. The promise itself is transformative. And so, with God's specific promise of presence, Jacob turns his pillow into a pillar that proclaims God is here. And this stone pillow becomes a monument for everyone to see, a rock that witnesses to God's presence and power and protection. And this in-between, off by the side of the road, nothing spot on the way to Haran is given a new name. It becomes Bethel, the house of God. Because it's no longer just an ordinary in-between place. It's a crucial intersection point of what God is up to in the world. And so a pillow and a place are transformed. And no less the person. I got my 3 P's in. Because in response to this promise of God's presence and protection and return, Jacob commits himself for the first time to the God who committed himself to Jacob before he was born. Jacob says, if that promise is true, and there's always going to be an if, because Jacob's a bargainer. If that promise is true, if you stick it out with me, Jacob says, and you will not just be the Lord, the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac. You will be the Lord, my God. Jacob is transformed by God's promise. Ladies, we may be a people who live in transition, in those in-between spaces. But our God is a God of transformation. And so he sees us lying uncomfortable on our bed of gravel. And he takes the rocks from our places of weariness and exhaustion. He takes the pieces of our fugitive exile state. He takes the pebbles of our hopeful plans. God takes the stones of our in-between, uncertain, sometimes far less than ideal circumstances. God takes those stones and He stands them on end. And on that rock, He builds a whole new future. And He steps into it with us, saying, I am with you. Even here. I will keep you. I will not leave you. Let's pray. Lord God, what can we say? But if you do that, if you are who you say you are, we can do no less than commit ourselves to you, that we might be kept by your power, by your protection, by your unending grace, that we might rest in you. Amen.
We all get